There's a boy lying in the grass. He doesn't move. You don't know how he got there or why. Then his eyes open and he stands up, and the world around him is nothing but shadow and shape. No name, no voice, no explanation. Somewhere out there is his sister. That's all you know. That's all you're going to know. So you walk, and the woods swallow you almost immediately. There are traps in the grass, spiders in the dark, and a silence so complete that your own footsteps sound like the loudest thing in the world. You are going to die. A lot. Nobody's going to tell you why or how to stop it. You're just going to have to figure it out the same way the boy does, one death at a time. A shy Danish artist spent 6 years building this world before anyone else ever saw it. He never explained what it meant. He never intended to. So step into the dark and see what you make of it on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 308th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are looking back at Limbo, the 2010 puzzle platformer from the Danish studio Playdead that told an entire story without a single word of dialogue, a single note of conventional music, or a single moment of certainty about what any of it actually meant. It was 6 years in the making, built by a small team that just kept throwing away the majority of what they created. And, as a result, Limbo is very much a study in how much a game can say by refusing to say much at all. I'm David Carlsen, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who I'm fairly confident would take one look at that early boat puzzle, die 4 or 5 times in a row, and then insist out loud that the game was clearly broken. He's my brother, Rob Carlsen. Rob, when a game gives you absolutely no tutorial and just lets you fail your way to the answer, are you the type that finds that satisfying, or the type who starts looking for, a walkthrough or the way through by, death 3, 4, or 5?
Oh, we're way beyond 5 at that before I'm looking up a walkthrough, Dave. I played Dark Souls. Come on.
That's a true statement. So you're just the kind of person that will keep throwing yourself over and over and over and over at a problem, hoping one of these times the floodgates finally open.
I mean, I'll keep trying to find a solution until I feel like I've exhausted all my options.
Yeah, but I guess the answer then would just be, what level of patience do I have at this very moment?
Yeah, no, that's the exact question. Have I been going at it a while and my patience is gone, or did I just get into this point and I'm like, damn, I got to figure it out?
Well, also that, but I mean, did I have a good day at work? So I have patience. You know what I mean?
Well,
like that answer is going to differ in a lot of different ways. And I genuinely think what it boils down to is, do I have the patience to keep failing? Some people like it. Some people don't. Some people want to figure it out by themselves. And some people, we've talked about me before where I don't feel like I have the time to put into this anymore. Some people don't want to be challenged. They just want to muscle through and get the story without the stress and hassle. So, I guess there are a lot of different ways to approach such a question.
Yeah, I agree.
2010 Limbo, Xbox Live Arcade. You would have been 15. Any familiarity with it?
No.
It was like fantastic game, absolutely fantastic game. Yeah, absolutely fantastic game. Uh, that is an era. I recently did a daily video on Bastion, which is another game that came out of this era, and the conversation and the comments turned into very much a bunch of guys, probably my age, but that's not evident on the internet, reminiscing about how this era was very different. Like when you had Limbo and Braid and Fez and Bastion, and this is really early in the concept of indie gaming. You know, before that was as widespread as it is now, and it felt so fresh and new and innovative. Not to say people don't make games now that are any of those things. It was just the concept of a game made by not a AAA studio was such a novel concept back then. And this was definitely one of the games that I was thinking about when we were in the comments talking about that, like how much we all kind of miss what it felt like to be in that time period at the time, you know? So, whole bunch of story to tell. Limbo is kind of fascinating, a lot out there on it. And before we get there, why don't we take some time and have you share with our listeners what else happened during this week in gaming history?
Well, first up, on July 19th, 1991, Final Fantasy IV was released for the Super Famicom in Japan, developed and published by Square. It was actually pulled from shelves almost immediately after launch due to an AI glitch that made a late game enemy encounter unwinnable, and was quietly replaced days later with a patched version. Glitch aside, the game itself was a genuine leap forward for the series, introducing the active time battle system, which let enemies attack in real time based on individual speed stats instead of waiting politely for their turn. Director Hironobu Sakaguchi paired that innovation with the most character driven story the series had told yet, built around a dark knight wrestling with guilt over the destruction he'd caused. It reached North America that November as Final Fantasy II, and decades later, it's still considered one of the sharpest turning points in the franchise's history.
I don't think enough people have played the like that first one, two, three, four Final Fantasies, right? You know, I a lot of people now have experienced seven on thanks to seven being remade, and the modern ones I think made a little more accessible because they're 3D. Not that the old ones aren't. They've redone all of them as what 3D, 2D, no, just 2D remasters, right? Yeah, 2D remasters.
Sure,
So
Dave. I don't know.
the stories of the old ones are fantastic, though. They're worth going back if you enjoy a good role playing story because let's be honest, it all started here.
Indeed, it did. Next up, on July 20th, 1988, Bionic Commando was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in Japan, developed and published by Capcom. It was a loose expansion of Capcom's 1987 arcade game of the same name, but the NES version made one very deliberate change. There was no jump button at all. Every bit of vertical movement in the game came from a grappling hook mounted on the hero's bionic arm, forcing players to swing, latch, and haul themselves through entire levels the way Spider Man might navigate a city block. It also buried a surprisingly dark story underneath its cartoonish NES presentation, one involving a fictional Nazi resurrection plot that Nintendo of America sanitized heavily for its Western release. Beneath the censorship, it remains one of the more genuinely inventive movement systems that the NES ever saw.
And they remade it. There's Bionic Commando Remastered that they remade in the modern era. If you've ever had a chance to play Bionic Commando, they're honestly a lot of fun. Just a little bit of nostalgia there. It was a decently popular game in the 80s, early 90s. A lot of fun.
Oh,
Try it out.
absolutely. I believe it. Next up, on July 22nd, 2004, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door was released for the GameCube in Japan, developed by Intelligent Systems, and published by Nintendo. It was a direct sequel to 2000's Paper Mario, and it used its papercraft visual concept more aggressively than the original ever had, letting Mario fold himself into a paper airplane, squeeze sideways through gaps as a piece of paper naturally would, or curl into a tube and roll across the floor. Underneath the gimmick was one of the most fondly remembered turn based battle systems that Nintendo has ever built, layering timing based action commands and an actual stage audience that could cheer you on or boo you into missing an attack. It's frequently cited by fans as the best entry the series has ever produced, a reputation strong enough that Nintendo gave it a full remake for the Switch 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're doing a great job remaking some of these It's depressing too. Let me say that too. I love it. Remakes like um Link's Awakening, Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, fantastic. The fact that enough time has passed to make a remake worthwhile, kind of depressing.
Both are true.
True, you got it.
Next up, on July 24th, 1997, Monster Rancher was released for the PlayStation in Japan, developed and published by Tecmo under the title Monster Farm. Its signature idea was almost absurdly clever for the era. You generated your monster not by picking from a preset list, but by physically inserting nearly any CD you owned into the console, music discs, other games, whatever was lying around, and letting the PlayStation's disc reading errors get translated into a randomly generated creature. Two identical looking discs from different pressings could produce completely different monsters. It turned raising, training, and battling those creatures into a surprisingly deep management sim, and it kicked off a franchise that spanned well over a dozen games and even an anime adaptation.
An anime adaptation. Wow.
Yeah,
I It sounds like it was kind of dumb, but honestly, finding every single like CD you could to see what kind of monster you got was so freaking cool.
I don't think I ever did that. I think I always just took the ones that were in game,
Yeah,
unless that was two that did that.
I loved it. I loved just popping everything in just to see. Yeah, it was so weird and so awesome all at the same time.
Indeed, it was, Dave.
Yup, indeed.
Last up for this week in gaming history, on July 25th, 2001, Max Payne was released for PC, developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by Gathering of Developers. It followed a grief stricken former NYPD detective through a snowbound, corruption soaked version of New York City, told through hard boiled noir narration and static comic book panels rather than traditional cutscenes. Its biggest contribution to the medium was popularizing what the game itself branded bullet time, a slow motion dive mechanic that let players dodge incoming fire while still shooting with full accuracy, a direct descendant of the freeze frame gunfights that had just exploded into pop culture 2 years earlier with The Matrix. It was a commercial hit large enough to eventually make Remedy a defining studio of the era. And Max Payne himself has been dragging that same weary voiceover through sequels ever since.
2 sequels, 3 sequels, 2. There's 3 Max Payne games.
Yes.
I love Max Payne. I think it's a great series. Love noir stuff though.
Honestly, the scene with the blood trail and the baby crying,
I know.
to this day has just left an impression. That I will never forget that scene.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the notable ones for absolute sure. Yeah, that's a fantastic game. They need to bring that series back for absolutely without a doubt.
Yeah. But I think we're here to talk about something else, Dave. So why don't
Are
you go ahead
we?
and take it away with the story of Limbo?
The story of Limbo begins with a boy who hated small animals. Arnt Jensen grew up on a small farm in Denmark. His parents were not farmers by trade, they simply kept a lot of animals for fun. Relatable. Jensen was shy and quiet, and he spent much of his childhood wandering off alone in the woods near the farm. He'd follow the stream that ran between the trees for hours at a time, dropping insects and leaves into the current and watching them as they get swept downstream. He has said that he always had a strange relationship with small creatures and parasites, that he hated all of them even as a child. And that's a detail that becomes real hard to ignore once you kind of know what waits in the caves of our topic today. Now, among the trees, Jensen felt something like a mixture of freedom and fear, he said. It was quiet out there, and that quiet put him close to more than just nature. He has come out and said that it put him close to death. That closeness came in part from what he read growing up. Jensen has pointed to writers like the Brothers Grimm, Astrid Lindgren, and Tove Jansson as major influences on his childhood, specifically because they were willing to write about death in ways that were far heavier than most stories that were written for children. When Jensen grew up, he channeled that eye for mood and atmosphere into a job as a concept artist at IO Interactive. It paid well, and at first, people seemed to genuinely love what he made. But over time, that work started to feel more and more corporate. Ideas got harder to push through, and something in Jensen just went unfed. Then in 2004, inspiration hit. Jensen picked up a pencil and he drew a place. Not a character, not a story, just a place. A beach, a dark cave that seemed to be asking you to explore it. There was no boy in the drawing at all. He still has the drawing, in fact. He knew almost immediately when it was done, as he was doing it even, that it was a game. Maybe something small he thought about at this point, a point and click adventure perhaps, that he could build on his own without much technology behind it. Like his childhood self following the stream through the woods, he assumed that this would be a solitary trip. For roughly 2 years, it was. Jensen taught himself Visual Basic programming, hunting for a way to bring his sketch to life without anyone else's help. He got a sprite moving on screen. He could push around some very basic visuals. It worked in the sense that it existed, but it was, in his own words, a long way from anything real. By 2006, Jensen realized that he couldn't get any further alone. So he set the prototype aside and decided to build something different. This time, a cinematic trailer, meant less as an announcement to the world and more as a hiring notice. He needed a programmer, and he hoped a striking enough video might draw the right one in. It too worked, just not in the way he expected. The trailer didn't quietly circulate among a handful of programmers. It went viral. Its monochrome look and sense of otherworldliness made it stand out immediately, and soon Jensen's inbox was flooded, not with programmers, but with publishers from all over the world. That terrified him. Jensen has said that he got scared by all the sudden attention, that it had been a one-man project up until that point, and that he had been afraid that these companies wanted to control it, to make it more commercial, to take it away from him before he ever really got to begin making it. One of the people who saw that trailer was a programmer turned producer named Dino Patti. Patti had spent his career moving from advertising into games, and by 2006 he had reached his own point of burnout. He was sick of the crunch, sick of watching bad management and industry constraints crush good ideas before they even had a chance. And so a friend pointed him toward Jensen's video, and something about it pulled Patti in. So he reached out to Jensen. When the two of them finally sat down together in the living room of Jensen's Copenhagen apartment, the difference between them was immediately obvious. Patti would later put it simply: Arnt thinks more than most people and makes good choices because of it. Dino just gets things done. Both mattered. Neither was enough alone. Their original plan was modest. It was going to be a free PC game built by just the two of them, a designer and a programmer. Patti even coded a little himself in those early months, but it didn't take long for both of them to kind of realize their ambitions had already outgrown two people. At this point, what Patti gave Jensen more than anything wasn't code, it was cover, right? Patti took on the job of fielding the publishers himself. He stood between Jensen and this flood of outside interests so that Jensen didn't have to face it alone. With someone else absorbing the pressure, Jensen found that he could say no again and again and again to people who wanted a piece of what he had built. None of that would have been possible without the video he made. What Jensen originally built as this quiet hiring notice for programmer had almost by accident found him something far more valuable, right? He found a partner who could take the weight of the outside world off his shoulders entirely. So together, Jensen and Patti built Playdead. Funding came first from their own pockets, then from grants through the Danish government and a Nordic game program. It was the first time a Danish video game had ever received support through those particular programs. In the beginning of January 2007, they moved into their first real office. It was 11 square meters, and Patti had described it as smelling rotten. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Basically, they moved into a closet.
That's tiny.
A rotten smelling closet. Maybe a rotten smelling bathroom, to be fair.
Yeah, that's befitting.
Yeah. Wasn't very big. 2 years later, they moved into a proper space, a fifth floor apartment with views over the city's rooftops. But it started in that small rotten room. Between those two offices, the studio began building an actual pipeline and engine. Jensen had already spent time researching for the right technology. Before Patti arrived, he was testing engine after engine after engine, and frankly, found nothing that would fit for what he wanted. And so, what Jensen wanted was simple to say, but hard to build. Put the boy into a scene and be able to test it within seconds. Eventually, one of the programmers they brought in for an interview ended up building them an engine from scratch, on the spot, custom engine, like the beginnings of it. And so they hired him on the spot.
As they should.
As they should. As the studio grew, so did its need for money. And needing money meant needing investors. By Patti and Jensen's own account, most of them were bad. Patti has joked that they hit nearly every investor cliche in the book. people with outsized egos and no real understanding of what they were funding, trying to steer a project that they had no understanding of. A very clear example in the interviews when Microsoft raised concerns about the boy's death being shown on screen. One investor's proposed solution was to give the boy a mustache to make him look older.
Okay.
It was the kind of note that told Playdead everything they needed to know about how much creative trust they could expect from the people funding them. So eventually, once success gave them the leverage to do it, they bought out those investors entirely. You know, bad investors had to go so we can make our own game. As Playdead grew through this time, so too did its team. Jeppe Carlsen came in as a programmer. His background was in computer science, and before Playdead, he worked as a game programmer at another small studio. He had no formal design background at all. He was hired to help build Limbo's engine. There's your guy. But it didn't take long for something else to become obvious. Carlson's energy and focus were better suited to a different kind of work. So he shifted from writing code to shaping gameplay itself and became Limbo's lead gameplay designer, the person most responsible for translating Jensen's mood and atmosphere into something a player could play and solve. Around this same time, the studio brought on a composer named Martin Stig Andersen. Anderson came from a background about as far from commercial game audio as you could get: electroacoustic composition. An
I don't think that's
academic.
that far off. He's making compositions for electro games.
Well, so electroacoustic composition was described as an academic, largely grant funded discipline. So, an academic discipline, right? Where instead of writing scores for orchestras, you record real world sounds and build them into a kind of sound collage. Sounds like he'd be a good EDM artist.
Yeah, that's fair.
He had never worked on a video game before in his life. But what drew him in, like many of these others, was that same trailer, right? They loved the concept. Anderson watched it and he found himself captivated by the boys' expressions, by the way the whole thing felt recognizable and abstract at once. That tension, he'd later say, was exactly what he loved about his own approach to sound. It felt like the trailer had been speaking to him directly. By the time production was in full swing, the core team had grown well past, the original two of them, at various points numbering somewhere between 9 and 16 people. But the people who mattered the most were now all in this room, right? There's director who saw the whole world before anyone else did, a producer who kept the outside world at bay, a designer who could turn atmosphere into puzzles, and a composer who would make sure that none of it ever sounded like a video game at all. So our core team is in place, right? And the real work of building Limbo's core identity could begin. And it's here, really, that we see a single guiding principle start to show up again and again, all across the board, in every discipline, independent of one another, no less. Strip away anything too clear, too identifiable, too certain, and let the player fill in what's missing. Now that starts with the look, right? Limbo's entire world is rendered in silhouette and shadow. It's an endless scale of grayscale, broken up by flickering lights and a layer of film grain. Jensen has pointed to German expressionist cinema and American film noir as direct influences. The same visual language used decades earlier by directors, like Fritz Lang, built on the shadow doing the work that the detail usually does. That choice wasn't only artistic, I might add, it was practical too. Patti has said that the studio deliberately avoided competing on realism or polygon counts. Instead, they chose to put their limited resources where they mattered most, which was the gameplay. Silhouette and shadow were cheap to build and impossible to mistake for anything else on the market. And to be fair, that look had been there for a while, right? Jensen had been drawing Limbo's world since like 2004, long before there was a team, the engine, a single line of gameplay code. By the time Playdead existed as a company, that visual identity in many ways had already been settled. Um, the team has looked back and kind of said they were fortunate that graphics were the one thing they never really had to worry about because Jensen had the idea covered from the get go. That's kind of worth sitting with for a second because it's important to know that's backwards from how most games get made, right? We were talking about Braid in the beginning. Jonathan Blow built Braid, for starters, with placeholder graphics. He refined the platforming and the story first and only brought in an artist once the prototype was nearly done. Playdead built Limbo the opposite way. The world was already fully formed in Jensen's head and on paper, so the open question wasn't what it would look like, it was whether they could build a game good enough to deserve it. So if the visuals were locked in from the start, the sound had to be built to match this world that already existed. And Anderson approached that problem with the same instinct for subtraction that kind of had defined everything else. His guiding rule was simple: the more identity a sound had, the more he distorted it. A voice, a recognizable animal call, anything with too strong an association risked breaking the atmosphere entirely. So he'd strip it down, warp it until only a suggestion of the original sound remained. He pointed to bird calls as a clear example. A clean, high fidelity recording of a real bird would have shattered the illusion of Limbo's world the moment a player heard it clearly enough to place it. So those sounds were heavily distorted instead, generic enough to repeat throughout the game without ever revealing exactly what they were. The boy himself never speaks. He has no voice at all, a decision very much tied directly to his facial anonymity. Anderson felt that a voice would overdefine a character that was deliberately left blank for players to project onto. That is the same blankness he says that let one player see a traumatized boy and another player see something else entirely. Even the boy's footsteps were built from unlikely sources. Anderson created a part of that sound using nothing more than the needle of a record player, dragged and dropped against vinyl, layered with real recordings of feet on grass and dirt, then chopped into small grains and stitched back together so that no two steps ever sounded quite identical. The boy was mixed loud against his environment on purpose. Turn him down, and the world around him simply gets louder by comparison. He had to, anchor the mix. And music worked the same way. The omission was the way to go more than presence. Anderson and Jensen shared a distaste for music as a tool to manipulate the player. So for most of the game, there is no music. When wind sounds go still as the player nears the game's spider, for instance, the silence does the work that a swelling string section would do in any other game. Even Anderson's hardest challenge, he said, the spider itself took 3 or 4 full iterations, took 3 or 4 full iterations to get right, cycling through debris sounds, warped tape recordings, and false starts before he landed on a sound that felt real without sounding literal. He called it an alternative naturalism, close enough to recognize, distorted enough to never quite place. Across every one of these choices, the goal was the same one driving all the visuals, right? Don't tell the player what to feel. Give them just enough to construct a feeling themselves. That same instinct showed up in how Carlsen ended up building the puzzles, just aimed at a different target. Instead of stripping identity out of sound or image, he stripped explanation out of the experience itself. From the very beginning, he had set a few hard rules. The game would communicate mood and setting visually. Movement would be limited to directional control plus two buttons, jump and grab, and there would never be any tutorial text of any kind. No prompts, no instructions, nothing telling the player what to do. And to be fair, that rule caused real problems almost immediately. One of the early puzzles requires the player to grab and pull a boat, but testers had no instinct to do it since they had just ridden in on that same boat moments earlier and really had no reason to think of it as something they could interact with. And so the fix wasn't text, right? They weren't going to use text. They wanted people to live in the world. The fix was staging. They built a new scene that forced the player near a different pullable object first, with the character's arms visibly reaching towards it, teaching the mechanic through that body language instead of through words.
Smart. Good way to do it.
Absolutely smart. This game is a masterclass in how to tell a story without the usual, with mood and atmosphere and sound. Masterclass. Carlsen has described the whole approach as a learning by dying game. Death was never a punishment mathematically, just a constant, an expected part of how the player figured out what to do next. His actual design process ran in two stages. First, you think of the player as your worst enemy and build them the most devious puzzle you can.
Nice.
Then you flip it and you treat the player as your best friend and go back through to lay in fair, readable clues, right? So wrong solutions had to fail clearly and quickly, since a player who almost succeeded with a bad idea would, cling to it and refuse to try anything else for a long time. The bear trap and spider sequence is a clear example of this in practice. Early versions placed the trap in the same scene as the spider itself, but that pulled players' focus onto the trap and away from the far more important threat. Moving that trap off the screen, they said, and out of sight, forced players to feel genuinely helpless in that moment using only sound, the audible snap of the trap springing to guide them towards the solution. And just like everywhere else in this process, puzzles were also kind of defined by cutting more than what it kept. Carlsen has said that they threw out huge amounts of design work throughout production, testing puzzles that were often far more complex than anything that made it into the final game. Visuals were stripped down to shadow, sound gets stripped down to suggestion, puzzles get stripped down to a single idea with no explanation at all. These are three different disciplines, three different people, all independently arriving at the same answer. That repetition wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't really about restraint for its own sake either. It was the direct result of a production process built entirely around cutting. There was never a design document for Limbo. It's never come up. They've danced around it. They've almost as much as said it directly. Instead, the team worked thematically. They prototyped around loose ideas and rebuilding constantly as they evolved those ideas right up until the very end. New material was still going in 2 months before the game shipped, a pace that reportedly left their producer more than a little anxious. That constant motion only worked because just as much was coming out, right? Across interviews, they have repeated one figure so consistently it's become something close to a mission statement. They said that they've thrown out roughly 70% of everything they built for Limbo. Puzzles, mechanics, art, story elements, entire ideas that just didn't survive contact with the rest of the game. I think it's important that we just keep that in mind, right? That's the piece to me that connects everything. Ambiguity in Limbo wasn't achieved by adding mystery on top of a finished game. It was achieved by removing anything that was too clear, too explained, too complete, until really only the suggestive fragment of each idea was left standing. The shadow instead of the detail, right? The distorted bird call instead of the real one. Even the narrative follows the same logic. Limbo ships with almost no story at all. It's just a single line. Unsure of his sister's fate, a boy enters the unknown. That's it. That's all the game gives you. The team deliberately kept information to a minimum on purpose, right? As I said, they wanted players to decide themselves what was actually happening. And so here we are. What started as a shy artist's private obsession had become, by the end, a studio wide discipline. Every department had learned the same lesson independently. The way to make a player feel something specific was to give them less, not more. You know, Rob, hearing about Jensen spending those 2 years alone teaching himself Visual Basic just to get a single sprite moving on screen makes me think about how much easier it is to start being creative in just about any discipline today. There are no investors demanding me to add mustaches to my podcast cover art. There's no, begging Danish grant programs demanding things from me for funding.
Yeah, and there's no going viral by accident and then getting terrified about it.
Not at all. Everything is so easy, so simple. And that's, in my opinion, kind of largely because we started this podcast with Zencaster. Zencaster is this all in one podcasting platform that takes the chaos out of getting something made. You just log in from your browser, hit record, and you're instantly capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. There is no custom engine needed, no hiring a programmer just to get your idea off the ground.
And what about when things go wrong? Because in the case of Limbo, apparently everything went wrong constantly.
Well, that's where Zencaster's multi layered backups come in. Even if your connection drops mid recording, your audio stays safe at the highest quality. There is no lost work, no throwing out 70% of anything.
Speaking of throwing things out, editing. Don't tell me that it takes 6 years.
Not even close. Zencaster's post production tools automatically clean up background noise, trim filler words, and balance your audio. No buddy system required at 4 in the morning.
And once it's actually done, how do we get it out there without flooding our inbox with publishers that we're scared of?
Just one dashboard. Zencaster distributes your podcast directly to all the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more, straight from the same place you recorded it.
So basically, it's the opposite of a 6 year self funded, 70% discarded indie game.
Pretty much. And if you're interested in starting your own podcast, go over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code all one word memory card lane. You can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. If you've got a story to tell, Zencaster makes sure that the ambiguity is only in the content.
No mustache required, but
Now,
encouraged.
but encouraged indeed. You want to start your own storytelling, head over to Zencaster, use our code, all one word memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month.
All right, Dave. So after all that chaos, did it end up paying off?
Well, getting Limbo out the door meant surviving that same philosophy under real pressure, right? Funding was self-directed from the start. And as we know, they eventually bought out investors, largely because staying independent mattered enough to the team that they just turned down a lot of other offers, right? So they turned down PC as their initial platform in favor of Xbox Live Arcade, citing concerns about piracy as a deciding factor. Um, the team made that platform decision remarkably late, deliberately. Jensen had said that they held off on committing to a platform as long as they possibly could, wanting the game to reach the widest possible audience rather than locking, themselves in based on assumptions about where it belonged. As the release date approached, the studio also made a conscious choice not to advertise. Jensen has said that the more they came to believe Limbo was something worth protecting, the less interested they became in marketing it conventionally. Instead, they leaned entirely on press coverage and conversations with journalists, a decision that their investors, the ones that were left by this time, reportedly found like incomprehensible. But they muscled through it, and Limbo ended up releasing on the Xbox Live Arcade July 21st, 2010, about 6 years after Jensen's first sketch of this beach in a cave. The response was close to unanimous. IGN gave it a 9.0. They called it amazing. Critics across the board praised its visual and audio design. Several named it among the best looking games of the year. It picked up Best Independent Game at the 2010 Spike Video Game Awards. Not everyone, to be fair, fell in love with it. Critic Mitch Kripata memorably tore into the game in the Boston Phoenix, calling it art for art's sake garbage that mistook vagueness for meaning. Patti has said that the team genuinely enjoyed reading that review in the office. Even hostile disagreement in its own way proved that the game was doing exactly what it set out to do, which is making people react. By 2012, Limbo had sold around 2 million copies across every platform it eventually reached. And its ending, true to everything the team had built toward, remained genuinely unresolved, right? It's the big question. Is the boy already dead? Did he fall from somewhere? Is his sister mourning him or joining him? The team has never answered any of those questions directly. They said that it actually makes them feel uneasy when someone gets too close to the concept that they had in mind. So, got to leave that mystery out there for mystery's sake. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea.
It's a great idea. I remember when Limbo came out. Like I said, that was a fantastic era. This Xbox Live Indie era was so good. This game is so good. This game is everything the team wanted to be. It tells so much by saying absolutely nothing. It's all art and sound design and literally no dialogue, no nothing. Like there are not many games that can pull this off. And especially only with shadows and silhouette, right? Like this game is in grayscale. Um
It is impressive as hell.
this is not a long game. If I remember correctly, 2 to 4 hours, somewhere in there. So it's not a big investment. Um, let's see if I'm right. What do we got? How long to beat? How long to beat Limbo? Answer is to beat the main story of Limbo, it typically takes about 3.5 hours. Booyah. Um, so it's not a big investment. It's the kind of game that you can sit down and play in one sitting, and it is absolutely worth it, in my opinion, if you're looking for, if you like atmosphere. Not everyone wants to sit down and play atmosphere. There will always be the people that just want to play Call of Duty. You know what I mean? Um, but if you're looking for, this is another one of those games. We've had multiple conversations about games as art. This is easily one of the games that belongs in that conversation. This game is art. Every bit of its design in the absence of design is the artistic part of it. But yeah, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Beautiful game, not a big investment, probably not very expensive. If you ever get a chance to play Limbo, I highly recommend it. I would like to add that I think that the real draw of Limbo is more than its sales figures or the awards that it got, right? This is a story about a shy kid who once followed a stream through the woods and just kind of let the current decide where things ended up. He took that whimsy and he spent 6 years building a game that does the same thing to everyone who plays it. It gives you just enough, and then it lets go of your hand completely. If today's episode has you thinking about the solitary kind of obsessive side of game development, or maybe the way a game can teach you everything through silence. We've got a few episodes already in the archive that might be worth digging into. Episode 69 tells the story of Cave Story, a game that's almost built entirely alone by a guy over 5 years, right? A
Hold on,
single.
Dave. Episode 69 is Cave Story.
Yes?
Okay. Thank you.
Badooch. Built by a single Japanese developer who worked nights after his day job, right? This is one of the games that sparked this entire indie game movement that Limbo would later become part of. Episode 101 covers the Stanley Parable, another game built on the same kind of ambiguity, right? Uh, and disobedience. It constantly undercuts what the player expects a story to do, which is very much what Limbo does, but in a completely different way. That's you know, both games have a refusal to explain themselves. And then on the top of the puzzle hierarchy, we got Portal 2, episode 294, a game that, like Limbo, teaches its players almost everything through environment and iteration rather than through a single line of instruction. You can, of course, find all these episodes and more at our archives, which can be found at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find when they head to our site?
You can find a calendar of our upcoming episode topics, know what we'll be talking about in the coming months. You can find a link to our Discord server where you can come chat with Dave, I, and all of our other friends that are over in that server. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor. And Dave?
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, technology, a console. As you know, we've done a few places before. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find out new things to share with you. It's this fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching. And in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob,
Dave, why don't you take away?
what did I learn today? I learned a lot today. I didn't know anything about this story. I think what I find most fascinating is the iteration, right? It's just this guy, I'm bored, draws a picture, spends a couple years trying to make a game out of this idea. I've done exactly what he did. I taught myself Visual Basic. I can get sprites to move, and the idea is stuck in my brain, but that's it, because I'm not an artist. I'm never going to be an artist. I learned that a long time ago. I do not have that capability in me. Now, you give me something that someone else has created, I'll do wonders with it. But I do not have the gene that lets you make things from scratch. I think our sister got that gene personally.
Oh, absolutely, she did.
So I can relate to Jensen's story so much because I have absolutely been there with Visual Basic, with Unity, with Playmaker, with Unreal. Like, I've done that with all these engines, right? All these things that I've been able to get things moving on screen, but it's not my things. So it's fun to watch him go from that. And then the route he took, right? At that point, he said, you know what? I'm going to make a video. And, because he could draw, let's be honest, I'm going to make a video and we're going to see what it does. And what it did was it gave him the rest of the equation, right? Gave him the team that he needed to turn his picture into reality. And I think that is just such a great story on itself.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that it's kind of crazy that he had an idea in mind for a picture and the graphics, that's what everything was based around for this game. It's not, again, we don't, like you said earlier, it's not normally how we think of design and how things come to be. There's an idea, and then you add to the idea from there. As far as here's the gameplay, how do we want it to look from there? Not here's what I want it to look like. How do we make that work? What do we do to make that happen? Um, and it just shows that they're able to make something after that small 11 square meter closet that they stayed in.
For sure.
But also, it's kind of hilarious that I mean, I shouldn't say hilarious. It's understandable, but also kind of funny getting scared by the flooded inbox for all the publishers for a game that you wanted to get out there.
True statement.
So
True statement. You got what you wished for.
exactly, like maybe a little more than you meant, but hey, you wanted it. Here you go.
Yep. Absolutely.
So that's it for me, Dave. So
All right. Well, before I wrap it up and take it into next week, is there anything else you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. We really appreciate you joining us as we take this journey and we learn about the games and the technology and anything surrounding them that made the culture what it is today.
Absolutely. Arnt Jensen spent his childhood following a stream through the woods, letting it decide where a leaf or an insect would end up, never quite in control of the outcome. 20 years later, he built a game that does the same thing to everyone who plays it. It gives you a shadow instead of a face, a distorted sound instead of a clear one, a single sentence instead of a story, and then it lets go of your hand completely. That wasn't a limitation of a small studio working with limited resources. It was an entire design philosophy applied over and over and over again by people who really never once sat down together and wrote it out as a rule. There was a visual artist, a sound designer, and a gameplay designer that all arrived at the same answer independently because the answer was already sitting inside this mood that Jensen had drawn back in 2004, long before any of them had ever met him. 20 years later, people are still arguing about what happens at the end of this journey. Jensen has never told the answer to anyone, and by every indication, he never intends to. But maybe that's the whole point, right? Some stories are told by explaining everything. Limbo is told by trusting you to fill in what's missing, the same way Jensen once trusted a stream to carry a leaf wherever it was going to go. Next week, we are trading silence for steel. In 1998, Namco took a scrappy arcade fighter called Soul Edge, threw out most of what didn't work, and rebuilt it into something sharper, faster, and far more ambitious. What came back was Soul Calibur, a weapon-based fighting game that didn't just compete with the genre's giants. It briefly outclassed all of them, technically and mechanically, on hardware that nobody expected to pull it off. So join us next week as we talk Clashing Blades, arcade ambition, and the game that made Namco impossible to ignore as we take yet another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.